everyone, this is Deckles here. Today we're going to dissect two rant videos by a person who is known as AZGS4 Productions. For those of you who do not know this individual, he used to go by a username Chandler Branch Productions, and he is also famously known as BNSF8010. Over the last few months, this individual has been having a massive hate boner on foreign trains in the US, and for some strange reason, narrow gauge. Recently, over the last few weeks, he had made two videos regarding said hate boners. One where he ranked his top 4 worst US railroads of all time, and it ran on Chinese steam in the US. So, let's climb on board and witness this train wreck together.
Hello everybody, this is AZGS4 Productions, and today I'm going to be doing a video where I rank my top 4 worst American and Swiss railroads.
So, make a note on why he says worst American and Swiss railroads. It'll make a lot more sense at the end of his rule rant.
From least to most objectionable. I was going to a top 5, but due to writer's block and a lack of ideas, I could only come up with 4.
Again, this is some obvious foreshadowing, but at the end of the video, he had a two-way tie.
Before we begin, I'd like to lay down a few rules. Rule number 1, I will only be doing railroads of the United States of America and Switzerland.
Obvious foreshadowing.
No railroads from Japan or Australia will be featured.
Again, he probably would rank the Japanese railroad system as one on the list, but because he only depicted it as American and Swiss railroads, yeah, I think there's a reason why you probably would exempt that from it, considering what we're going to discuss later.
Rule number 3, I will not include subways or elevated railroads or streetcars, just to keep the list simple.
Yeah, you're not really complicating things if you do add a subway or an elevated system. Not gonna lie.
Now with that out of the way, all aboard!
God, he needs to do a better job with his audio. I mean, just invest in a blue mic, please.
The number 4 spot goes to the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad. This gets the number 5 spot because it used non-standard railroad equipment.
So, because the Rock Island wanted a locomotive that can easily blend in with the streamlined Rocky Mountain rocket train to Denver while allowing them to operate an independent portion to Colorado Springs, is basically public enemy number 4 in your eyes.
You know me, I only like standard railroad equipment. For example, there were only 2 AB6s ever built, and guess what? The Rock Island Railroad proudly owned both of them. Now, it's not that I don't like non-standard equipment. I just think standard equipment is better in every sense of the word. Don't get me wrong, I think the Krauss Maffeis are okay. I just think standard equipment is, like I said before, better in every sense of the word. Coming in.
Also, the only reason why you hate the Rock Island solely because they ran non-standard equipment, you might as well have to add the Rio Grande for the tunnel motors, the Southern Railway for the high hood locomotives, CN for running wide cab Gs, and a few other roads too for that matter onto your little list. Probably be a lot bigger than 4, but oh well.
And at number 3 is the Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway Company, or CPKC for short. Not only is their name a mouthful, but
so you couldn't really find better pictures of this? I mean, you could just open the image in a new tab and download it from the source, but you do you.
They paved the way for far worse mergers, like the shitty proposed monopoly of a Union Pacific-Norfolk Southern merger.
Okay, the reason why he hated CPKC is because it paved the way for the UPNS merger. This does not make any sense. And that's because there is a massive difference between CPKC and the proposed UPNS merger. CPKC is literally 2 smaller railroads that meet literally end to end at one place and turn into one massive continental rail network. UPNS, on the other hand, is where two largest railroads combine to become the largest transcontinental railroad there is, fucking up the balance between East and West. Of course, yes, it did wipe out the Kansas City Southern. However, in all fairness, KCS was always the one that will have to end up going. They're always the oddball, the 7 Class 1s, it being a north to south route as opposed to east and west like the rest of the Class 1s. Hell, even 2 decades before this merger, KCS was pretty much exempt from new merger regulations at the time, as it concluded that a merger with Kansas City Southern would not affect as much as if UPNS wanted to merge, or in an example at the time, BNSF and CN that wanted to merge in 1999, but got rejected.
I really hope that gets cancelled. And not only that, but they need to split Canadian Pacific Kansas City up.
Again, the only reason why CPKC existed is because of 2 smaller railroads, meaning end-to-end, to form one massive continental rail network. And even then, they're still considered the smallest Class 1s out there.
Not to mention the CPKC livery is just a rip-off the Allegheny and West Virginia Railroad. It's number 767 from Unstoppable. And
also, the Unstoppable comparison is pretty dumb. There's barely any similarities, and even if there was, I seriously doubt that Disney would care much about a locomotive being painted up as a locomotive from a movie that they probably exist to even have in the first place, as a result of the 20th Century Fox buyout.
And for the people who don't know how bad these mergers are, to quote Alanis Morissette, I don't know. Second prize goes to the Wilmington and Western.
Okay, I'll skip this part. There's nothing really to complain much about it. He has a great point about it. However, other people probably done a better job with this.
Before we get to our first place winner, we're going to look at some dishonorable mentions. Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
Okay, let's just skim over the dishonorable mentions. Here's the Santa Fe and Tally win. The Santa Fe because it's overrated, and Tally win because it's dinky narrow gauge. There, I literally saved you a couple minutes.
Here, of course. And finally, my number 1 pick for this list is a 2-way tie. The Reitishbahn Railroad Company and the Plaster City Railroad Company. In the former case...
So, this is a 2-way tie. Why can't one be number 2 and one be number 1? Anyhow.
The trains aren't even aesthetically pleasing. The railroad is not even scenic, and no, I do not consider the Landwasser Viaduct scenic.
So, let me get this straight. He hates the RHB because the trains aren't aesthetically pleasing, and that it's not even scenic, even though the photos he used are taken on very scenic spots. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get why he's pissed about the RHB. But I do know why he's upset about it. And that goes to the next subject of his little rant.
I think it's overrated garbage. The Plaza City Railroad Company, however, I really don't have many complaints. So why is this at the top of the list? This is the case for Reitishbahn as well. It is because they are fucking narrow gauge railroads doing standard gauge work.
So, for the Placer City Railroad, a railroad known for running unique Alco-powered narrow gauge diesels in a different environment, he barely had nothing to complain about. But one thing. One that is probably the only reason why the Placer City was well known and popular. They're both narrow gauge. That's it. Nothing else. They were ranked at number 1, not because of how they operate, but because the track gauge is less than 4'8". He could have picked many other railroads that are much, much worse on this list. He could have picked Penn Central, a railroad infamous for being one of the largest bankruptcies of all time at the time, and destroying an entire state's economy by leaving it to freeze in a yard. Or we can talk about the Montreal Main Atlantic, a railroad known for literally blowing up an entire town, killing dozens of people because they let a flammable oil train with worn brakes on shit track sit on a downward grade. He could have done Norfolk Southern for also blowing up a town caused by bad operating practices and their inept response. But no. It's the Placer City and RHB. Two railroads that probably wouldn't be on anyone else's list but him. Clearly, let's just watch the rest of this.
Transporting goods and passengers, like for example in the case of the Placer City Railroad hauling heavy gypsum, or the Reiteichbahn carrying general goods and passengers, is a job for a standard gauge railroad.
Again, I literally made the statement. Narrow gauge railroad exists because of the tight curves. They exist because of the tight environments. The Placer City is cheaper to lay track in. The RHB exists because the Swiss Alps created a challenge that other standard gauge systems would have.
Now I know you're all probably thinking, "Oh, but Daniel, the Durango and Silverton did that back in the day." And you're correct. The difference is that was then. This is now.
Again, narrow gauge systems do have a purpose here in this world, even in today's time. It's just literally a track gauge. Nothing else to complain about.
It made sense in the 20th century, but this is the 21st century for fuck's sakes.
Steam locomotives are 20th century things. So shouldn't we hate steam locomotives because they were not a 21st century thing too?
Honestly, unless by some miracle they see the light and convert to standard gauge, in the words of Don McLean,
they're not going to change the standard gauge because of your whining. Let's just be frank.
the Placer City Railroad and the Reiteichbahn need to go bye-bye Miss American Pie.
Also, let's look at this beautiful picture together. How mature of this. How real mature of this.
They don't deserve to exist and should be ripped up and sold for scrap. They do not do big important jobs and never have and never will. And I don't know why they're so valued.
Because it is uniquely different than your stock standard Class 1 standard gauge network.
They are weak and should be destroyed because they frankly don't need to exist.
Again, that's literally your opinion. Nothing else.
In fact, they are so horrid that I refuse to visit them.
Fine.
Nobody cares about them, and frankly, I don't. They're...
Okay, name one other person here. Name one other person that shares the same sentiment about why you hate narrow gauge. Name one person, other than yourself. Name one person. Say it. Name one other person. You probably won't. In fact, if you tell other people about him, they probably think, oh, that's cool. Maybe I should go visit it. Thank you. But no, you still think that they're horrible all because the track gauge is not 4'8". That's simply why you had this hate boner. You're just doing this because you just don't like the fact that there's not 4'8". That's simply your only reason why you dislike the RHB and the Placer City. Literally. But I digress.
They're utter bollocks. They do not serve any purpose whatsoever and only serve to make my eyeballs burn.
Oh yeah, literally. Yeah, like hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago, they laid this track in a very narrow gauge, and all because they wanted to troll some guy in Arizona on the internet. That's literally why narrow gauge systems exist. Just to mess with you. Come on.
Those two railroads are overrated trash that deserves the scrapyard. Anyways, that's all I have to say, so leave your comments in the comments section, and this is AZGS4 Productions, signing off.
This is gonna get much worse than this. Hear me out. Anyhow. Now I'm going to show you pretty much the reason why I made this video in the first place. Why I wanted to make this video in the first place. And that is his Chinese steam locomotives in the US rant. So let's see how terrible could it be.
Welcome back to the Rant series. Today's topic are the Chinese steam locomotives preserved in the US. Before we begin, I'll lay down one rule. I'll be covering both the actual Chinese steam locomotives, such as RJ Corman 2008 and Iowa Interstate 6988 and 7081, and the Chinese replicas, which were slightly modified to resemble American steam engines that were near identical and were done as replicas as they were built brand new to represent engines that are long gone. Valley Railroad 3025, Susquehanna 142, and Boone and Scenic 8419.
So 142 and 3025 makes more sense on replicas of railroads from long gone. They're meant as a replica of already extinct locomotive classes. Boone and Scenic Valley 8419 was pretty much just, oh yeah, we just bought this Chinese locomotive with little modification whatsoever.
Now with that out of the way, let's begin the video, shall we? Oh my god. These are the true definition of communist darkness.
So the reason why he hates Chinese replicas is because they're simply Chinese communist. I'm sure he wanted to say something else much more vile, but I think he realized that if he did, then everyone, their mother and the dog, would probably shit on him even more than what he's already doing right now.
It's bad enough that China's railroads suck because...
Real mature, man. Real mature. You're just literally celebrating 8419 getting damaged in transit. How am I going to take this shit seriously if you do shit like this?
Because the government is run by liars, but the fact that...
Again, you only hated the Chinese locomotives because of China's authoritarian government. Nothing much. In fact, you're pretty much racist towards Chinese people because of their oppressive government.
That we have these crappy engines in the US is even worse.
Because they were cheaper to import. They're like literally brand spanking new out of the factory. And it's much cheaper and easier to import. Then go just find some park locomotive that's like rusted out and spending millions and literally taking years to restore the operating condition. That's why they exist.
I mean, for crying out loud, I get that not everyone can afford to restore a US steam engine, or at least build a replica of one.
Again, the reason why, at the time, it's easier to import a Chinese steam locomotive is because it was easier and cheaper to do it than restoring one or building a brand new replica. Building a brand new replica is probably much more expensive than restoring one because you gotta build everything from the ground up. That's why it is taking the T1 project years to be built. That's why it took Tornado years to be built.
But for goodness sakes, maybe if that's the case, you could make an old-fashioned diesel your star attraction, like the Verde Canyon Railroad Company. They don't have steam, and yet their F units are their star attraction.
Again, a tourist road does not solely exist because of what pulls it. Regardless of what it is. Steam, diesel, electric, whatever. A tourist road exists because of how scenic it is and the customer service on the train. For example, the Virginia Scenic Railroad in Virginia is powered by a stock standard GP38-2, but still pulls in a lot more revenue every year. In fact, they pull so much revenue every year, they started allowing steam engines to run on these excursions, such as the 611. And later on this year, the pure market had 1225.
In my opinion, if you can't afford to restore an American, Canadian, or Mexican steam locomotive, or at least build your own brand new replica, maybe just don't run steam.
Again, that is entirely your opinion, but unless you run a tourist road yourself, stop dictating how other railroads can do it. If they want to do a steam engine, fine. But trying to find one to restore to operating condition is getting rather difficult, especially in recent years. Especially around the time that the Chinese SYs were being imported to the United States in the late 80s, early 90s.
But worst of all, instead of spending that money on some Chinese trash, that money could have been donated to a fundraiser to help restore an American, Canadian...
Again, he's still saying, oh, Chinese trash, whatever.
Canadian or Mexican steam locomotive in desperate need of restoration.
So the reason why the Valley Railroad and the NYSW owns an SY is because it was simply cheaper to import it, as opposed to, as I mentioned earlier, finding a rusted out park engine. At the time, there was a steam shop in China that's actively building brand new steam engines for the Chinese government, and that they can easily import this and ship it across the ocean for a fraction of the cost at the fraction of the time than if they tried finding one in the United States, Canada, Mexico, wherever, and spending the time and money to restore it.
Run by someone who can afford it and is willing to write a check to do so. Additionally, if they can get away with importing a Chinese steam engine, what's stopping them from importing something worse, like, I don't know, a Japanese narrow gauge train?
Again, they probably won't do that unless there's a really dedicated fan. But this is getting really scenic-phobic, not gonna lie.
Train, or a TGV, or a European high-speed train in general.
They already did this back in the 90s. Amtrak trialed some to run on the Northeast Corridor and on a national tour to show the people, hey, this is what the future of railroading will look like here in the United States.
If I have anything positive to say about these, it's that at least their owners tell the truth about where these communists come from.
Really? I mean, I don't think the general public is gonna give a damn if what it came from. It just looks like a standard American locomotive in their eyes. I mean, rail fans was like, oh well, it's a Chinese steam locomotive, but at least they appreciated that, hey, it's something different than a GEVO or a YCAB GE rebuild.
In my opinion, if you have the capital to ship a locomotive across the ocean, you have the capital to donate to a fundraiser to fund the restoration of some real American railroad history.
Again, restoring a steam locomotive from the ground up and importing a steam locomotive from China are two completely different things with two completely costs.
And not some communist garbage.
You're literally saying communist garbage. So wouldn't that mean that any other Russian locomotive during that time could consider to be communist garbage because it's owned by the Soviet Union? Anyhow.
That's all I have to say for this video. So this is AZGS4 Productions, signing off.
Okay. So you're basically, this whole video is all about why Chinese steam locomotives are bad. And the only reason why you're saying it's bad is because, in your eyes, they're just communist garbage. You're basically just saying this because you're xenophobic. Hell, you were just called out the day prior for saying a racial slur, all because Susquehanna 142 existed. Hell, I'm sure the reason why you're doing this shit is because you wanted to be edgy and cool and rage baby. And quite honestly, nobody thinks that you're edgy or badass just for saying that narrow gauge sucks or that foreign trains don't belong in American museums. Instead, they're literally pointing and laughing at you and calling you out for how absurd, idiotic, xenophobic, and uneducated you are. Literally nobody has any issues with narrow gauge, nor Chinese themes, nor Italian, nor the RHB, nor Japanese narrow gauge, nor the Plaster City, nor any other word that you have a hate boner with. In fact, if you actually have go outside and touch some grass and learn more about the subject you're ranting about with an open mind and take criticism to heart on these rants and then appreciate the efforts done to preserve said subjects, then maybe people wouldn't be pointing and laughing at you as often. As I end this video, I really want to add this quote that is pretty relevant to the topic at this hand, and it's from a very cult classic movie. I think you may recognize it.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.